One of the questions I get all the time from Illustrator users is, where's the rounded rectangle tool in Indesign? Well, there is none. But that doesn't mean you can't round corners of a rectangle. If you'd like to follow along in this lesson, go to File, Open, and in the Working Files folder, go to Chapter 4 and choose Round Corners Fast, and just click Open. I'm going to start by going to my selection tool and just clicking on this graphic frame with the motorcycle image in it. And then I'm going to go under the Object menu to Corner Options, and it's going to open a dialog box that allows me to have control over each one of the corners in my selected rectangle. But in order for anything to happen, I have to first check Preview. By default, the corners are just square, but if I click down on the pop-up, I can go to something called Fancy. Kind of small, let me make it bigger. And you can see the fancy corners are getting bigger and bigger and bigger with each click. And you'll notice that every one of the corners is getting bigger, and they're all the same. That's because by default, they're linked together. We'll get back to that in just a little while. Why don't we go back to that pop-up and choose Bevel? And you can see now the corners are beveled. I can also do Inset, and I have Inset Square Corners. There's also an Inverse Rounded, which they are rounded, but they're inset. And of course, there is Rounded. And if I increase that even more, you'll see that it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But what if I only wanted two of the corners rounded? Maybe I wanted the upper left corner and the lower right corner to not be rounded. Well, I could just go back to None for both of those corners. But first, I forgot to unlink the corners. So let me go back to Rounded and now unlink them. You see the broken link. And in the upper left, I'm going to make it None. And in the lower right, I'm going to make it None. So that is really pretty cool. But there's a faster way to do all this. Anytime you can accomplish something without going under a menu to a dialog box, you're far better off because it's faster. Let me just hit Cancel and we'll start over again. I'm sure you've been wondering, what is that yellow box near the upper right-hand corner? Well, that controls your corners, and if I hover above it, it actually says, click to edit corners. And if I do that, I now have control over my corners. So if I wanted to add round corners, all I have to do is click and drag inward. And it's actually giving me the radius that I'm dragging inward. So that's a lot faster. But maybe I wanted one of the other options or alternatives. Well, if I hold down my Option or Alt key, let me do that, and I click on the little diamond, you'll see that it's going through each one of the alternatives, one alternative with each click. And now I'm back to just square corners, so that's None. But I wonder if there's a way that I can control just one corner. Anytime you want to confine something to just one, if you hold down your Shift key and then click on a corner and drag, you'll see that just one of those corners is changing. Let me undo that. Well, it might be hard to do this with two corners, to do two rounded corners. But what I could do is this instead. Click and drag to make my rounded corners everywhere, and then Shift click and drag on the two that I don't want rounded and drag that all the way back so it's now a square corner. And let me do the same thing in the lower left. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key and click and drag outward until I have a square corner again. So that is really cool. It's really nice having these live corners because I just don't have to go into a dialog box. And it makes cornering a lot faster. In the next lesson, we're going to continue to discuss objects.